What's up, guys? Welcome back to Read and React. My name's Logan Campbell, and today we're going to be going over 4 of the riskiest quarterbacks and tight ends in this year's draft. Now, I'm doing what I did last week and doing 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends in this video, because if we try to do 5 risky quarterbacks and tight ends, we're going to end up talking about guys that you really either don't have to worry about being a risk because they're going so late, or that just aren't even going to be drafted at all. So, for the most part, these quarterbacks and tight ends are all, I believe, top 8 at their position. Once you kind of get outside of that threshold, again, it's a lot of the guys that are kind of going for free or that you're going to be taking with one of your last picks in the draft. And so really we want to look at the guys that you are taking at a point where you are taking them over a flex player or, maybe the first guy on your bench, since that's kind of where, again, you're assuming some of that risk passing on one of those types of players. So with that, just to reiterate, risk is just natural for every player. It's going to happen for everyone. Quarterback and tight end are no exception, although quarterback especially does typically carry less variance than the rest of the positions. There is still risk for everybody, unless you're Josh Allen, in which case you're just immortal, so maybe throw an asterisk by his name. But risk also isn't a bad thing. Like I've said, risk is what opens up values in drafts, and it's just important to find the balance. You don't want to take every floor play. Don't only take no risks, because then you're going to end up with a mid-average team that has no chance of actually winning the championship, which is the end goal. Or you're going to end up with a team that is in dead last in week 2 when 3 of your 4 first picks are hurt or underperforming. So you really, again, just want to make sure that you are setting yourself up for the best possible range of outcomes, ideally giving yourself the most ways to win the championship with proper risks and proper floor plays when necessary. So with quarterback and tight end, risk is approached kind of differently. I know I've talked about in previous videos for the wide receivers and running backs, the risk is what creates the value, and that's kind of where you want to look. You want to look for the guys where the risk is maybe taking them too far down the draft board and then draft them in hopes that they outperform that risk. Well, with quarterback and tight end, with quarterback especially, you really want to avoid that risk at all costs. That's the whole point of taking an early quarterback instead of a running back or wide receiver. You're not going to draft a dude as like the second or third quarterback and hope that he hits that mark. No, you're taking him because he is going to hit that second or third spot. And so with that, it's a little bit different. Now, there are still guys that get knocked on the draft board due to risk for one reason or another, and that's where you can find value, but it isn't as inherent of value in that risk category, because typically if you're taking those risks, you do set yourself up for more failure, because again, you're taking them over some guys that may be less risky comparatively in the draft, and so it's kind of just about finding that sweet spot. With tight end, it's mainly balancing upside and floor. Realistically, there are only 3 to 5 guys every year that have a true chance at finishing as the tight end 1 overall. And it's just important to understand this so that way you're not looking at the tight end 10 and thinking, oh, he has a shot to break fantasy and be a league winner, because realistically he's not. And that's okay, but it does affect how you evaluate risk, because like I talked about last week in one of the other quarterback tight end videos, tight ends typically have very low variance once you get past the elite players. And so it's important that if you are taking a risk on one of those middle tight ends, that it is with the idea that he can finish as a possible tight end 1 or possibly tight end 2. So what type of risk do we find for these players? I went over it for running backs and wide receivers, and this is where it really is very different. Tight end is pretty similar to wide receiver, the target share being infringed upon or injury. So tight end is more or less the wide receiver risk, redone. But with quarterback, it's very different, because obviously different things are going to affect the quality of play for a quarterback. So one of the main things, and this is just kind of all-encompassing, is if the offense gets inherently worse year over year, and I'm not talking in terms of, those slight variance, like they went from a top 3 to a top 5 offense. I'm talking about when your offense loses a key weapon or multiple players, such as offensive linemen or like a Pro Bowl or All-Pro level weapon, or if you get a new, worse offensive coordinator. We see this year with the Giants, Matt Nagy. We are not really looking forward to that, and it's brought into question a lot of the Giants draft picks in this year's draft, where you do have to consider that as a possible risk. And overall, just a downgraded offensive ecosystem, again, due to coaching, players, whatever it may be. Those are the things that affect a quarterback more than anyone else, because the quarterback is the one who's touching the ball almost every play. And so if, the play calls suck, the offensive line isn't good, it's really easy for a quarterback to go from good to bad through really no fault or regression of their own. It's just kind of what can happen to an offense as a whole, and where the offense goes, typically the quarterback follows. The other one is kind of injury, but with a little bit more to it, where it's more their loss of their competitive advantage. So imagine if you took Lamar Jackson and, he has gotten hurt, but take Lamar Jackson and take away his rushing upside. Well, okay, that knocks him down quite a bit in fantasy. That's kind of what I'm talking about. If you see a guy who gets hurt, or maybe it's age and they lose what has made them elite or a draftable quarterback option, that is something that can definitely hinder their ability to hit their ADP or possibly just pay off on the risk you're taking. Again, it's mainly with rushing upside. We do sometimes see it with the arm strength, but that's typically with only really old quarterbacks who a lot of times aren't being drafted anyways. The last one, and again, really we see this in extreme cases where they're, a bottom 5 or top 5, but we're talking about schedule. So again, realistically, you're only seeing this in the extremes either way. So if a quarterback faces a very tough schedule or a very easy schedule, we saw this with Drake May last year. He finished quarterback 2 on the back of one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. And it can affect, again, it can more so affect the offense as a whole than it can individually the quarterback, but it is something to keep in mind, especially when you're looking year over year where there's a drastic change in the schedule. So, and then like I said, for tight ends, it's basically the same risk as receivers, injury, overprojection of role, or just someone stealing kind of their targets. It is a little less risky in pretty much everything except injury, because a tight end's targets are usually semi-independent from a wide receiver's. You're not going to have a tight end that's running 50-yard go routes and, oh no, they just got a new deep threat who's going to take that away. No, tight end targets are usually pretty self-contained. Running backs can sometimes affect that if they become the check down option, but it is still one of the risks they bring. And again, like I've said over and over, risk does not make a player one to avoid. Overall, you really just want to make sure that you are aware of the risk you're taking and that you are taking the proper measures, especially with quarterback and tight end. Ideally, if you're taking a top 3 to 5 quarterback, they should finish as a top 3 to 5 quarterback. I do not recommend reaching on a guy who has the potential to reach the top 5. To me, that's more what you look at in the 8 to 12 range is the guys who are going to take that jump. But with tight end, you do see it a little bit more where you are hoping for that growth. And it's just important to be aware of, okay, what could cause this to go wrong, and making sure that you are then mitigating that as much as possible. Now, the first guy we're going to talk about is, again, someone who is in the top 3 of quarterback ADP. Both of the guys we're going to talk about today are actually top 5, because as I was looking at the board, once you get past about 6 or 7, it really goes down far enough that you're essentially drafting guys for free. One of the guys I was looking at for this was Jackson Dart, but he's going in like the 11th round, and at that point, I feel like that's not enough of a risk for it to be really noteworthy. So both of these guys that I'm going to talk about are going early enough in drafts that I do feel like you are truly taking a risk and truly possibly giving up something really good in order to get them. The first one we're going to talk about is Drake May. He came off a quarterback 2 finish last year, but like I mentioned in the intro, he had an incredibly easy schedule, and this year that is definitely going to change. I don't know. I haven't seen the exact projections. Obviously, you don't really know until the end of the year how hard a schedule truly was. But I do know that in terms of projections, they are closer to the harder end than the easier end than like they were last year. He currently goes off the board, quarterback 3, 53.8 overall, so you're getting him between the 5th and 6th round. And for what it's worth, their offense did improve in terms of the offensive ecosystem, which I know I just talked about as a risk. Last year, their offense really didn't have anyone that you felt truly dominated, and they went and got A.J. Brown. The rookies are going to have another year under their belt, so Travion Henderson and Will Campbell should both improve. They draft another O-lineman, so the offense really does appear to be taking that next step and hopefully evolving. But again, the harder schedule just really is something that you do need to look at, especially considering how poorly Drake May played against the elite defenses in the playoffs last year. Granted, it was against the Texans and Broncos, who had like 2 of the top 3 defenses in the league, but it is something to remember because we don't want to take a quarterback 3rd overall in the 5th or 6th round where you could be taking your flex or your RB2 when he has some of that downside due to that harder schedule. So, like I said, guys like David Montgomery or Terry McLaurin are available. Joe Burrow goes just a few picks behind him. So if you're kind of sitting in the middle of that round and you can wait and maybe get Joe Burrow, I'd say upside-wise, honestly doesn't have as much as Drake May. Drake May does have true QB1 upside, I will say. But Joe Burrow has proven to have a consistent floor where the only thing that causes him to have a down year is injury, which, he's coming off an injury last year. So the odds of it happening twice are low, assumingly. But overall, I don't know. I think with Drake May, I don't hate him. I think he's a very good player, and I think he could honestly have a pretty decent season. But to me, you're drafting him near the ceiling when he has a lot of possibility for that regression. I think there's just better options for Drake May no matter what your strategy is. If you're trying to take a floor guy, a safer guy, I would take Burrow. Again, he's proven that he can do it against any defense. His offense is a little bit better and just more proven. And I think if you're looking for a guy with rushing upside who, has some of that top tier upside, I think you can get a guy later like a Jalen Hurts or a Jackson Dart or even the next guy that I'm going to talk about instead of Drake May, where he is kind of the earliest of the late QB1 candidates, the guys who have the rushing upside, who have the possibility to finish QB1. And I would rather get one of the guys towards the later end of that range since you're saving yourself 3 to 4 rounds of draft capital while getting a player with a similar range of outcomes. But like I just mentioned, this next guy I believe does have overall QB1 upside. He's proven that he can produce at a very high level. He has the rushing upside and their offense got significantly better. The one thing with him is that he is coming off a very, very rough down year, and he's only been in the league for 2 years, so you really don't know what you're going to get from this guy. So I'm talking about Jaden Daniels, quarterback 5, 66.4 overall. So he goes almost a whole round later than Drake May, which again is part of the draw, I think. I would say Drake May has a marginally higher floor purely because we've seen Jaden Daniels' floor from last year, but their upside is honestly the same, and if nothing else, I think Jaden Daniels has a higher likelihood of paying off on his upside because of his elite rushing ability that I think is a better bet to happen than Drake May's uber efficiency from last year. So, like I said, he had a major sophomore slump. He had injury. The offense just didn't play well even when he was healthy. And he ended up missing 10 games, and even in the 7 he did play, only finished as a quarterback one time, which is a top 12 finish. Every other time, he was a quarterback that you technically should not have even played in a standard format. Compared to his rookie year, where he finished 12 of 17 games as a QB1, that's obviously a very big jump. And I think that's why Jaden Daniels is such a risky pick, because we've seen him have a year where he was a top tier player. He was rookie of the year, amazing rushing ability, and that was with an offense that I think we can all agree is better off now than it was at the time. But last year, we saw the downside. We saw that it can go to that cataclysmic level, and I think that is the hard thing that you really have to think about with Jaden Daniels is, are you able to come back from that cataclysmic failure? Because clearly it's possible. I do think the range of outcomes is more stable and is higher this year. David Blah is their new OC. He has kind of alluded to wanting to use motion more and just make the game a lot easier for Jaden Daniels, really play to his strengths, get him out in space, just use him in the way that he should be used. And on top of that, they got Stephon Diggs, they got Chigakonkwo, drafted Antonio Williams. Overall, they should have a much better offense. Terry McLaurin will hopefully be fully healthy this year. Last year he held out, and then as we see with most holdouts, ended up kind of getting hurt and just not really playing up to the level that he was paid. But I think that they did enough to surround Jaden Daniels with the players that can hopefully make it so that he doesn't have to be Superman, which is where I think his floor is significantly higher this year than it maybe was last year. So he does go around a lot of the less stable options at those skill positions like Rome Odunze, Christian Watson, Carnell Tate, and Jadarian Price. I like all these guys, but the point is he's not going around the like bona fide starters. I think that's my hard thing with Drake May, is that he is going around a lot of those guys that you will feel pretty confident starting versus once you get to Jaden Daniels and kind of into the Jalen Hurts range, you start to think, oh, okay, I can get a guy with, top 2 or 3 upside and give up a bench player or a guy that I'm kind of 50-50 on, maybe not feeling the most confident about, and you can get someone like Jaden Daniels with that upside. And so I would probably lean him over Drake May if you want to take a swing at quarterback. But overall, I really would just feel better about avoiding both of them. I think if you're trying to get an early quarterback, Josh Allen is the most proven commodity. I know that he goes super, super high, but if you're in a league where you can afford to get an elite quarterback, I would go to Josh Allen. Otherwise, I would wait towards later rounds. Quarterback is so deep this year, I would say more so than we have ever seen it. I mean, realistically, there are solid starters all the way through like quarterback 18. So even if you could honestly not draft a quarterback and still end up with a pretty viable starting option, like a Jared Goff or even like a Tyler Shuck, who I think is a super high upside starter this year. Like, I just don't think that there's any reason to be in a rush to get a Jaden Daniels when, again, you can get Jalen Hurts, who goes a few picks later, or you can wait and get a Jackson Dart. Even a guy like Bo Nix, who has finished as a top 10 quarterback each of the last 2 years, is going at like quarterback 14 for basically free. So I don't know. I just think there's a lot more guys that you can get later that are going to give you a similar range of outcomes to Jaden Daniels. Maybe not the top 2 or 3 upside that he offers, but overall, I would just avoid both of them because, again, I think the difference between Jaden Daniels and the 10th quarterback off the board is significant. The margin in there is significantly less than the receivers that you might get at each of those ranges or the running backs. I really think it's better off using those picks on the sleepers, the high upside guys, because those are going to be who win you your league. Whereas for quarterback, you are more than okay to just kind of play the stable game, play the floor game, and find the couple guys that have a little bit more upside later in your draft. Now we're going to hop into the tight ends, and the first guy we're going to talk about is someone who certainly has that top 2 or 3 elite level upside. It's really just a matter of how much of the year are you getting that upside for. And I'm talking about Tucker Kraft, currently going off the board at tight end 6, 62.8 overall at the time of filming this. And with Tucker Kraft, the risk solely comes down to the injury, but it is something that is worth being aware of because, again, he still goes as the tight end 6, goes in about the 6th or 7th round, right around Jaden Daniels. And while it has pushed his ADP down the board, it is still something that you need to be prepared for in the year. I do believe that if he hadn't gotten hurt, he would have obviously finished the year significantly better than he did, but I think he would be up there ahead of like Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren and would be in the tight end 1 overall conversation. He was on an absolute tear last year, just dominating fantasy, was the clear favored target in the Packers offense, and then he tore his ACL. And I think that's what really spooks me out is, yes, he is returning to practice. Sounds like he's going to avoid the pup at the beginning of the year, which is a good sign. But ACL injuries typically take a very long time to return to production. So he may play the entire year, not miss a game, but it really is just going to depend on how long you are getting that true version of Tucker Kraft that we saw be so elite last year. The Packers did let a few of their main target earners walk, so in theory, the targets should be a little bit more consolidated. Again, I don't know how much this affects his workload. Like I mentioned, tight end targets tend to kind of be fairly independent of the rest of the team. Sometimes running backs and tight ends have some crossover, but in terms of receivers, usually there's enough difference in the role there that it's not going to affect them a ton if you get rid of a wide receiver, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And so my recommendation with Kraft is to draft him, or if you want to draft him, that is, get a decent backup like a Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, a guy going in the 10th, 11th round, just in case, because again, he may be practicing, but who knows what level of play he's going to be at. Who even knows if he plays week 1? Training camp is very different than in-game action, and I think it's just very important to be aware that just because a player is practicing doesn't mean that they are going to be playing week 1. We've seen this over the years happened so many times where guys practicing for all of training camp, sounds like he's progressing, and then all of a sudden he doesn't play week 1, and you drafted him thinking he was going to be your elite week 1 starter, which, again, I don't hate the Tucker Kraft pick. I mean, tight end 6 is a pretty good discount for a guy who has that upside, but it really just depends on how long you as a viewer and as a researcher, think he's going to be, at a lesser state of production. And most importantly, if you can mitigate that for a few weeks, if you are really just hammering your draft, you hit quarterback in a great spot and you got some great value at running back and wide receiver, Tucker Kraft could be great for you because you may feel really, really strongly about your wide receivers and running backs to the point where you say, okay, I think I can still survive a few weeks with either him at a lesser level or a Mark Andrews type. I'm going to take him so that way when he does come back, I have that weekly upside and it can really be a game changer for your team. I think the biggest thing is I just wouldn't reach for him. I don't think you can safely say enough that he is going to pay off to, really zone in on him and just really make it your effort to pick him. But I think if he's a guy that falls into your lap, or if you're sitting there and he's, slipped a few tight end spots, he very well could be your best option. Again, especially if you've hit the other positions hard. That's kind of my recommendation. Again, I think he could end up being a late league winner. It's just a matter of when you start getting that production in the season. The last guy we're going to talk about is someone who doesn't technically fit any of the risk factors stated. I mean, I know tight end is similar to a wide receiver, but honestly, my biggest problem is just I don't know that he is worth the draft pick. I mean, I think his downside greatly outweighs his upside, and to me, that is enough of a risk. And I'm talking about Harold Fannin, tight end 7, 71.4 overall. So, he is going about a whole round later than Tucker Kraft, which I think is appropriate. In my opinion, he should be going a little bit later. And really, it is purely because of the Browns' offense. He was amazing last year. Tight end 6, 11.7 points per game. On the Browns' offense, that is spectacular. But I think that their wide receivers last year, them being so inconsistent and just straight up bad, like honestly, to not sugarcoat it, really led to that happening. My main concern is just the offense. I mean, the Browns offense is one that we continuously do not want to invest in. And on top of that, we've seen time and time again where these middle tight ends don't really end up separating themselves. So to me, Harold Fannin is in an offense that's bad enough to where I don't think he has that top 2 or 3 upside. And so rather than taking him at tight end 7, I think there's 4 or 5 guys behind him that you could take that you'll get within a point of the production while saving yourself 40 to 50 picks of value there. The Browns also did add Denzel Boston and Casey Concepcion, who honestly I've just seen really good reports of out of camp. Now it is training camp, so I don't really know how many bad reports we see. Typically, if you see a bad report in camp, it bodes very, very poorly for the player because most people get very positive reviews. But again, looking at Harold Fannin and just where he goes in your draft, he goes ahead of guys like Parker Washington and Jordan Tyson, who I think both have infinitely more upside to not just outperform their ADP, but to truly contribute to your team. Whereas Harold Fannin, to me, the replacement value on him is just very easy to find elsewhere in your draft or even streaming. I very well could see there being 2 or 3 tight ends on the waiver wire that are giving you that similar week-to-week performance with Harold Fannin. And the other problem is, again, with the Browns offense is he had some really, really amazing weeks, but it is going to be a very up and down flow of the year just due to the nature of their offense. There's going to be weeks where they only have like 150 total yards and he only has 2 catches for 20 yards. And that just is not something that I want to play with. I mean, I would much rather wait 3 to 4 rounds, get a guy who averages, 10.5 instead of 11.5, but hits it almost every week than Harold Fannin, who hits 22 points and then it's 4 and then it's 18 and then it's 6. And I just don't feel like he is going to be a good, consistent week-to-week starter. I really do feel like he is going to be a guy that is going to lose you weeks, not because he himself is such a bad player, but you are just going to have to rely on him for more than you are going to get from him consistently because of where you're drafting him. And again, I would much rather draft some of the wide receivers around there. Again, Jordan Tyson and Parker Washington, I think, are very solid flex plays by the end of the year, if not closer to wide receiver 2 or even low-end wide receiver 1s if things fall right. Whereas, again, Harold Fannin, I think, just doesn't have that top 3 upside due to the offense and just the way it's kind of structured. I'd much rather wait a few rounds and get someone with a similar range of outcomes to him, like a George Kittle, who, is he hurt? Yes, but once he's back, his range of outcomes is going to be very similar, if not better than Harold Fannin's or Isaiah Likely. I think if you look at Isaiah Likely and Harold Fannin, The only difference is that Harold Fannin produced last year. I think in terms of their floor and their ceiling, they are very similar. If anything, I almost like Isaiah Likely's more because he has the quarterback play. He has just as little target competition. I mean, Malik Neighbors, but again, with the injury, who knows where that's going to end up. And overall, I just don't think Harold Fannin is a special enough guy at this price point to where he's worth drafting. I think you might as well just get a flex or a high upside running back 3 versus a tight end who is probably just going to be in the mix of the tight end like 4 through 10 when you could get another guy in that range multiple rounds later. And that closes out our riskiest quarterbacks and tight ends in this year's draft. Just to recap, we went over Drake May, whose main risk is the schedule and just uncertainty of if he can produce against top tier defenses. Jaden Daniels, who's coming off that injury and just overall poor performance last year, to see if he can get back to his freshman year form. Tucker Kraft coming off that ACL injury. At what point are we getting the true Tucker Kraft level of production that we loved last year? And Harold Fannin, who is on the Cleveland Browns, which alone gives him a significant amount of risk, especially at the tight end position. And that also ends out our riskiest player series. We did running backs on Monday, wide receivers on Wednesday. Be sure to check out both of those videos if you haven't already. I do the same thing with those two positions that I did today, where I go over kind of the riskiest players and what you need to be aware of before you draft them as a starter on your team. Next week, we're going to get into my favorite draft picks, position by position, round by round. So we'll be doing similar to what we've done the last few weeks, a running back day, a wide receiver day, and then a quarterback tight end day. And I'm just going to go round by round and give you my favorite pick, whether that's a value, whether that's just a guy who I think is going to be elite this year, whatever it may be. I'm going to give you my favorite picks through the first few rounds of the draft at each position. Be sure to keep tuning in both up until the start of the season and through the season. I'm going to be posting videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday all throughout the NFL season, and you won't want to miss a thing. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.